Hey everybody, good to see you back once. Don't bump that. Good to see you back. Let's just roll with it. Good to see you all back once again. So, the build back of the Farmall H engine begins immediately. Caught me a little bit off guard right there. Let's build the Farmall H engine back up, starting immediately. You can see I've got the bench somewhat full of parts and pieces that I cleaned and prepped yesterday. Everything's ready to go, so we'll start with the rear main seal, housing, retainer, lots of pieces involved in that. You can see I've got the new felt ring halves soaking in engine oil. They've been there all night. That's a pretty important step. You want to have those all well soaked in oil before you put it together, otherwise they'll just heat up and burn themselves out on the spinning crankshaft. But the first thing I needed to do with these was to check them to make sure the gasket surfaces were still flat. As I mentioned last time, these are kind of a lower grade pot metal material, and they like to warp around any of the bolt holes just about every time you tighten them in. So I took them out to the flat milled surface of the table saw with some sandpaper on top, and sure enough, they were a little ways out. That's how we start out. Yeah, you can see shiny spot, shiny spot, shiny spot. That's where it's high. So it's dove in and warped around all three of those bolt holes. We've got some flattening to do. So after a few minutes of sanding, I brought this flange back to spec, as well as the joint line of both pieces. And this area right here and this right here both need to be very flat because that's where it meets the block. But this darker shaded area here does not actually contact anything. But we had to make sure that the bottom edge was flat as well. And you can see there was a little bit of warpage around the bolt holes. So every time you tighten these pieces down and then remove them again, that's likely to happen. So that's a very important step to check each time to make sure everything gets sealed well and you have adequate clamp load against the gaskets, not just around the bolts, but in the span between the bolt holes as well. I'll get the new felts out of the oil and soak the excess out of them, otherwise they'll just squeeze out all over the place, and then we'll begin putting everything together. Nice tight fit down into the groove. That's what I like to see with these. You can see the oil squeezing out. That's good. And here's a little bit of customizing you'll have to do every time. There's going to be some excess to trim off. And when I do it, good sharp knife, and I leave the ends just a little bit high, sticking up above the surface, all right? Because you're going to want to have a little bit of compressibility on that joint, and you've got that gasket that goes in between that's going to account for a certain amount of thickness. So I just eyeball it, just sticking up a little bit, about like that. And to start bolting everything up, I've got the horseshoe shaped gasket already stuck to the block with some sealer, as well as the two, here I think we can see it, two small gaskets on either side of the felt on the joint. So I'll just start with the lower seal half. the other half of the seal retainer now. It's going to help a lot if you can start these two side bolts, because they will pull the two halves together and compress those felt half rings. Without a little bit of help here, you will struggle quite a bit trying to get everything started. All right, this is a scenario where you don't fully tighten anything until you've at least started and snugged everything, because it all has to get drawn together at the same time. With the side bolts having pulled the two halves together, I've started the rest of the perimeter bolts. We will now run them up tight. Once everything is at least just a little bit snug, then we'll start by tightening the two halves and then work our way the rest of the way around the perimeter. All right, we've worked our way around the perimeter and the halves. All those bolts are tight. So now we have this plate that goes on top. The gasket's already in place. It's hard to see it because I've got that black sealer on it. So that will drop down in, and you usually have to tap these a little bit because they're made to be a little bit tight. And we've got the 3 bolts that go across the rear of the seal retainer. And there are also these 2 round rubber pucks included in the gasket kit, and they go down that hole and that hole right there. We're not putting those in today because it's best to put these in right before the oil pan goes on. And these 2 bolts are just temporary so that we can exert some pressure upon this plate and let that sealer fully set up on the gasket that's beneath it. Oil pan bolts will take the place of these once we get to that step. And now we do a test spin to see how tight that rear seal is. And it is. That's good. You want to have a really tight fit on that flange at the back, so that is normal for a new felt seal. All is good. All right, back up to the front of the engine again. Gasket is in place on the block, and I don't know if you can see it from your vantage point. Pay special attention to this small feed hole right here. That is a pressure port for oil to feed the idler gear. That is going to come into play here in just a minute. So just remember what that spot is for. Get you positioned back on the old cameraman pole. All right. Here's our bolts with the fold-over locks. The only 2 on the front side of this engine. Surprises me they only use just these 2, but you're talking to a guy that would prefer to put a fold-over lock under everything, inside, outside, everything. Perfect foldage. There, we've got some assembly lube in place. Idler gear goes on now. And I mentioned this small oil feed hole earlier. The reason I pointed it out is because we've got another hole that's just in the intermediate cover. That second hole is for this little alignment dowel. Okay, so don't mess up and try and put the dowel in the other one, because that's the corresponding passage for it that lubes the bushing in the center of the gear. And no timing marks on the idler gear. It can go on, mesh with the crank gear, any way that it wants. Assembly lube on the journals and the lobes. Camshaft goes back in. Good. Backlash and timing mark, timing mark. Good. Who's texting me now? Cam thrust plate bolt number 1. Thrust plate bolt number 2. Crankshaft oil slinger and pulley woodruff key. Now I've got the gasket in place, stuck to the front cover. One last look. It all looks right. I could seal it up. Now, none of the bolts are more than hand tight right now because the front cover does not have alignment dowels like the intermediate cover does. It can float around a little bit. So my solution is to put the crankshaft pulley on, and hopefully the way it interfaces with the front seal, it should self-center everything out. Now we tighten everything down. New fold over lock time. There's the old one. These are really simple. They're just like a donut. There's no tabs, tangs, anything like that. So with that in place, we can just cinch the crank pulley nut. And here's why these locks are so convenient. They give you a recessed cavity down here to fold the lock into that engages it with the pulley. And then you just pick a flat anywhere to fold the lock onto to engage it with the nut. Better than popping bubble wrap. And we finish up with the cross pin. Notice how the center has been cut in. That is for the set screw that will go in from the top. And this is a lot less of a fight when everything is clean and free of rust. Pretty much just taps right into place, all right? Set screw comes in from the top. Oops. There, it should be tight against the pin. Yep, doesn't move. Time for lifters once again. You know, I thought I would be a lot smoother at this. The one in the corner is kind of tough. There we go. Look at that. As he struggles with the next one back. Oh, the one in the corner is kind of tough. Yeah, that's the hard one. Yep. And you can't get the one in the wide open in either. Good job, man. This is a lot harder than it should be. 7. Oh, we're getting the hang of it now. 8 in the corner. Look at that. Smooth. We get good by the time we're done. And the retainer for the lifters. So we can roll this upside down and do whatever we want after this. Copper seals under the heads of the Tappet cover bolts, gasket secured in place. All right, everybody, we have the water header plate goes on next. And I've never been impressed with the gaskets that come pre-made in the kits, because the first time I did this engine, I used the gasket from the kit and it actually seeped coolant right through itself and dripped down the side of the engine. I took it apart and redid it. And I had the same thing happen when we rebuilt the Super M. I gave that kit gasket another chance, and that one did the same thing. I took it back apart and made my own, and everything was good to go after that. So we don't use that gasket. I make my own out of cork rubber because these are always very pitted. So I am not ashamed to say I put plenty of sealer on them, because I don't want to have this leak and, you know, after it's painted, go back and take it apart. Certain orientation here. We have these boxes. The flared up ends on them need to face forward, because that's the direction that the water pump is sending the coolant. So you want those flared up ends to be able to catch that. And the outlets must face down. That kind of gives it a swirl around the cylinders and up into the head after that. You don't have to go extremely tight with these either. I just use this 1/4 inch speed wrench, and just snug is all they really have to be, because after you've got pressure on the gasket, you just start deforming the bolt holes in the cover. So it doesn't take a whole lot, especially with this thick cork rubber gasket. It will seal up just fine. Time for the oil pump to go back. Get the drive gear meshed in with the cam. There. That went pretty smooth. Just the 2 base bolts. That's all that needs to be tightened in. Now for a little known fact. We have this large open hole on the pan gasket surface at the back of the block, and one at the front as well. Those were for alignment pegs when they machined the block at the factory. They serve no purpose now. And if you are a parts manual diagram aficionado such as myself, you will notice item number 39. It looks a bit vague. It tells you exactly what it's all about. Number 104942, cork number 6 standard, 9/16 of an inch by 3/4 of an inch by 15/16 long. crankcase locating hole plug. I always put corks back in here. I don't know if they really do a whole lot, but I think they will help the pan gasket to seal just a bit better. I'll tap those in with a mallet and then take a sharp blade, flush them off with the flange, and they'll be good to go. This is also the time that we will take these round rubber pegs, coat them with sealer, and they go in these holes on each side of the rear main seal housing. They just prevent oil from seeping out this joint and getting into the bell housing area. These usually need to be trimmed to length flush after they are installed as well. And finally, we can seal it up. Two longer bolts go back here into that rear main seal housing, and then we have that nut goes on the stud. And then everything else is the standard 1-inch long 5/16 thread bolts. One final piece. Can't forget the oil fill cap. Hallmark for the H's, the M's, the W series. Neat little detail. So here we are. We have walked through the fire and came back out the other side. The engine's been taken down as far as we needed to go, resealed, built back up. I did a bit of a leap of faith, being that the machine shop contacted me a few days back saying the cylinder head was a good, viable rebuilder. So I went ahead and resealed everything around sleeves and pistons and everything that I'm gambling on being able to leave intact. Oh, that being said, a recent comment from Luke Weinbrenner, 8809. Do you think the H will be ready for now then? IH is the feature this year. Yes, my goal was to have the H done by, well, right now. As I record this, this is July 4th. And when I brought the H into the shop this spring, July 4th was my self-imposed deadline to have this project done, complete, finished. I mean, 100%. And, well, way back in episode number 6, when I found coolant in the oil and ended up determining the cylinder head had a problem, that's why I looked a bit pale way back then, because I knew it pretty much shot the whole summer's schedule. So I would love to have the H ready by now then. That's coming up, I think, around August 18, 19, 20, 17, 18, something like that. It's about third weekend in August. So I don't know. Everything's just taking too long. But progress has been steady. I've just thrown everything I've had into this all year so far. So we've got the engine ready for the cylinder head, and I'm at that point. I've got the bell plate ready. I'm ready on the flywheel and the clutch. I've made all the new fold-over locks for the flywheel bolts. All that is set, ready on cylinder head. All that hardware is there. So I'm really hoping within the next few days I will get a call saying that cylinder head is done, and we can finally tick that item off the list. Fingers crossed. Thank you for watching, everyone. We're going to start throwing this episode together, and it's back in the shop here to work again tomorrow. Hope to see y'all back again.